Okay. Hi, I'm Lisa with the Bookworm of Edwards. I've been a bookseller here for about 10 years, and we are here to talk about, with Rebecca Taylor, to talk about her first woman's fiction book, Her Perfect Life. And she's joining us from your home in Colorado, I believe. Okay. And you're typically, this is your first foray into women's fiction. And can you talk a little bit about your inspiration and tell people what it's about a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, I'd like to say hello to anyone and everyone joining us. And thank you very much, Lisa, for having me at the Bookworm for this opportunity. So yes, it is my first women's fiction. And I did transition out of, previously I had written YA books in the past, or young adult for anybody who's not familiar with that term. And yeah, so my first women's fiction novel, and the sort of, if I kind of get at the inspiration for it, I talk a little bit about this at the end of the book. And I actually talked about this in another interview too, because it sort of made me realize, you know, when you get to ask that question, of course, you have to come up with an answer. But then like the more I think about it, of course, the more you sort of realize that there's kind of a lot of different places that inspiration came from, you know, because you had mentioned, Lisa, before we started this, there's kind of a lot going on in the book, you know, so there's sort of different inspiration for different aspects of the book. But I think, you know, one of the main ones is definitely something I talk about at the end, and that's the dynamic between the two sisters. So the book is about two sisters, and their names are Eileen and Claire. And Eileen, well, we'll start with Claire. Claire is sort of this internationally renowned, best-selling, really prolific, very successful novelist. And she's got a multitude of titles to her name, and she's sort of become one of those household names. And her sister, Eileen, has kind of a more conventional 3 kids, struggling marriage, struggling financially, sort of life. And we open the book with Eileen, and she's trying to get her 3 kids ready for school in the morning and is behind. You know, she's sort of behind the 8 ball and just rushing, and nothing's going, and they're running late. And as she's doing this, she's getting these alerts from her sister's most recent, she had a premiere the night before. So one of her books was made into a movie. And so we open up with this very glamorous picture of her sister on the red carpet in this gorgeous dress, looking absolutely amazing. Meanwhile, Eileen's like hair is everywhere, kids are late, you know, she's hungover because she got in a fight with her husband the night before, and she was drinking. And so just the kind of dichotomy between their 2 lives. But what kind of got me thinking about that to start with was back in 2012, during the Summer Olympics, I was watching like everybody, and Michael Phelps was getting ready to go up and win gobs of gold, right? And so the camera panned to the audience, and they kind of zeroed in on his family. And it was the first time it ever kind of registered to me that he had 2 sisters, and they were older than him. And it kind of got me just sort of thinking about what would that, you know, knowing the sibling dynamic, one being a sibling myself, and then also having 2 children who are very close in age, what would that be like, you know, to have this sibling who is this like sort of internationally renowned superstar, while you have maybe this more conventional life. And so it kind of got me thinking about that. And then it kind of made me like, I was sort of went into the internet, of course, and was thinking, you know, trying to find other examples of this. And there's actually some essays that are out there that are written from, and of course, I'm not going to remember what they were now, but like the perspective of the other sibling. And, you know, they are very happy and, you know, love their sibling, obviously, but that there is that kind of struggle sometimes of just living a little bit in that shadow. And so that's kind of what, not that the book is at all about swimming or medals or anything like that, but definitely that difference between Eileen and Claire was like, how do you get there? And then how do you deal with that? You know, some of the maybe very real envy and jealousy, particularly if you didn't give yourself permission to pursue your own dreams. And that was definitely the case with Eileen. Like she hadn't pursued her own dreams. So
exactly. I think reading this, what struck me, I wanted to tell our audience also that we're going to open up for some questions a little bit later at the end. So start thinking about your questions for Rebecca. But this book is so fast-paced. I mean, I wanted to find out what happened, and it's suspenseful. But it's not it's a psychological. There's so many secrets. For me, this book was family secrets and the harm that does.
Yeah.
And also some very heavy, there's some very heavy themes in here, because it's quite a bit about loss and reconfiguring your family. And I think that if you could talk a little bit about, you know, marriage and family dynamics, and what your big themes for that, because it's the dialogue you get very, and the characters are very well multifaceted. So,
well, thank you very much for saying all of those wonderful, lovely things, because that's, you know, it's of course what you're going for. And, you know, for me, I think authenticity of characters,
yeah.
And their motivation is always prime for me. And partially that's because I work as a psychologist. And so I'm fascinated. Yeah, I'm fascinated by people and behavior and why we do the things we do. And there's always reasons for behavior, and it's not always obvious, you know, in terms of why we do this. So, you know, anytime I think you have a character person on screen in your book and they're doing something, it needs to make sense, you know, one, to them and their personality, and two, what they want, you know, why are they doing this, or, you know, what are they not getting, you know, in it. And so I do think that character motivation has to be authentic, and it's sometimes one of those things that's most frustrating to me. You know, you have your little pet peeves about books, you know, kind of thing, and that to me that's definitely one of my pet peeves. Like I read all sorts of books for all kinds of reasons, you know, genre, literary, anything. But I always want an authentic character on the page doing things that make sense. I don't have to agree with what they're doing. In fact, sometimes the, you know, bad behavior, I'm okay, let's go, you know, but it has to make sense to me in terms of why they're doing it. And I'm sorry, what was the question though?
well, just some inspiration. How long did it take you? Do you know, when you set out to write these characters, do you know how the end? Because the ending is quite important in this kind of a project. So do you know where you're going when you're writing these characters, or do they kind of speak to you as you go along? And then you know, Claire would do this, but Eileen, you know,
yeah.
Are you revising as you go along?
So I don't know. It's funny when you try to pick apart your process, because there's definitely things that, you know, I do X, Y, and Z kind of thing. And so I think the way I kind of just overall describe it is, you know, they talk about being a pantser or a plotter. And for anyone who's not a part of the writing world, the difference between those two things are, like, do you sit down and you plot your book from beginning to end with very specific scenes, and you know what you're going to write before you do it? Or do you just sit down with kind of a notion of what you're going to do and you pants it, is what they say. And I think I'm really kind of somewhere in between those two things, because I do sit down and I do like a rough plot, you know. Sorry, I know kind of some key moments that I need to hit, particularly when it comes to, you know, rising escalations, or, you know, getting to the climax of a book. But when I sit down and I work on a scene and I know that needs to be there, a lot of times, like, stuff happens in the scene that, you know, I would have known that was going to be the case. And I think the reason why that ends up happening, particularly with my books, and you'll know this, is because I get very much into the head of the character in the moment, you know, with the conflict that is happening in that scene. And so you can have that scene resolve the way you want it or need it to in order to lead to the next one. But there's a lot of different conflicting, you know, dialogue type of stuff that can happen kind of on the fly. And to me, that's what makes writing fun, because as I'm sitting down and I'm writing it, when you really are in that place, and I love getting into this place, and sometimes it's really hard to do, but that flow, when they talk about being in flow state, and you can do that you do that with any sort of activity, whether you're playing music or you're playing a sport or you're running, or, and that definitely happens with writing too. And, you're just very much in that scene, and it is like you are watching that movie play out in your head as you're typing. And so to me, the best writing moments are when it's like I'm reading the book as I'm writing it, because you're definitely in that flow state. It doesn't happen all the time that way. I mean, sometimes it's like each word is pulling teeth, it's like you just, getting it out there. But oddly enough, when I go back and read stuff later, I can't tell the difference between the stuff that was easy and just kind of, was a flow versus the stuff that I sat down for like an hour and I only got 200 words on the page. So yeah. So I do tend to generally know how the book is going to end, but that could change based on what happens. And I always hope that, it's kind of coming together in better ways and more surprising ways than I would have even thought to plan for at the time, like and it's kind of, I'm working on a new book right now, and I'm having these moments where I'm writing and it's kind of like this new sort of thing happens. And I look back, I'm like, oh, like this is actually really cool because something I did earlier in the book, and I hadn't even thought to include that consciously, when I when I started it. But wow, now look at how that ties into that theme and pulls all of those things together. And to me, that's the really sort of fun, exciting thing that you can't plan for necessarily, but when it happens, it's really cool. So
it's really nice to see that you have fun writing. I really, and that I think that shows in your writing in some ways. It's very cinematic, very cinematic. And your sense of place, which really struck me, is first Colorado and the Denver airport.
Yeah. And
then it switches to the beach, Muir Beach, which I had to look up, and those dramatic those scapes, landscapes, the two different landscapes, the mountains and the sea. So I was wondering if you would talk about is sense of place important to you in this book?
I think, in terms of, I'm trying to think like how that necessarily comes into play. I think, I like to try to set it somewhere where I would enjoy being, or I think about like a reader, like where would you like to spend some time, or something that you find interesting, and, an airport. And actually, so here's a little tidbit too. I actually used to be a flight attendant years ago when I was very young, and I love to travel. Obviously, I did that for a profession for 7 years, I think it was. And airports to this day fascinate me. Like even the smell, like, and what I'm talking about when I say the smell of an airport. When you even approach an airport, or you open the door to an airport, and you get that recycled sort of balanced air that comes out at you. And to me, that's just exciting. You've got hundreds of thousands of people going somewhere, different places, and I still to this day think that airports are like one of the best places for people watching that there are. You just sit and watch. I could sit in an airport for hours before I got bored. So I definitely think it really is a little bit selfish, I think, when I'm writing it, because it is definitely somewhere that I want to spend time. And I would say actually that's probably true of the book too. I do probably tend to be a bit of a selfish writer with regards to, I'm writing the book that I feel like reading. So, and I'm creating characters that I find interesting. And now, of course, the risk in that is that, you can't just write a book for yourself. And so hopefully it's going to translate to like a lot of different people too. But I think when you can marry an interesting character with conflict in an interesting setting, and I think you can make any setting pretty interesting, actually, depending on your perspective and your how a writer describes that setting or that place, and particularly their character's experience in it. So, you can, a beach, I suppose there are people that don't like to go to a beach, but, that seems like kind of an easy sell. It also takes place a little bit in New York. But then there's scenes in Casper, in Casper, Wyoming too, which is beautiful in its own way. You know, it's a small town and beauty, but those girls didn't really maybe appreciate that, you know, as they're going through their teen years, and they're just kind of pushing against the boundaries of this small town and wanting to escape. So yeah, I think setting can be very important, and I think it definitely should inform the character's experience at the time, you know, where they are in their life's journey, and what does it mean, and how does it kind of motivate them as well.
Well, that added the richness to the book, because as you kind of, it's almost not a flashback as it goes back. It's not like a linear, you know, all of a sudden you're, you know, they're not all of a sudden, but you get to see why they are motivated from their childhood, and all the family dynamics that you weren't privy to in the beginning of the book. It just kind of revealed with nice pacing, I thought. And you're obviously a family. You have two kids, I believe. You have two teens.
Yeah, they're teens now. Yeah.
So how is your writing process? Do you and are you working full time? I mean, do you write in the morning? Do you write in the evening or any time?
Yeah.
Do you have a certain?
Yeah, so I do work. I'm a school psychologist during the school year, and so I work in like a public school. So that makes the summertime kind of nice when it comes to writing, because I have a lot more flexibility, obviously, to get words on the page. So that's one nice thing about that. But I can't get a lot. You know, I don't get it all done in the summertime. I wish I was one of those people that sat down and wrote a book in, 10 weeks. Like that would be amazing. But yeah, I don't work that way. And then once I do go back to work, I tend to sort of get myself back on a schedule where I'll wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and write for about 2 hours before I need to start getting ready for work. When the kids were little and when I was writing young adult novels, I would same thing, like get up at 4 before, like Eileen, I would have to start getting them ready for school to get out the door, and then I'd go to work myself, kind of thing. I've tried writing in the evening or when I get home, but anybody who works in schools would probably agree that by the time I get home, I am exhausted. And it's a lot of emotional, I do a lot of emotional work, at work. And so usually by the time I get home, I'm like dinner, glass of wine, back porch, a book, and maybe just some quiet, it's just quiet time. So I usually do better after I've been rested and I wake up. I prefer to get up early and do it. So, yeah. Oh,
that's great. It works for you. There's some heavy themes, infidelity.
Yeah.
And some, I don't know, I wouldn't want to give up too much away. But as, the sisters clearly have love for each other. And I like that balance of the seriousness of the issues, and the mystery of families, even in your own marriage, that how you can not know certain things.
Yeah.
And then you have to look back and see the signs. Was that heart-wrenching to write as it was to kind of read, and then getting to the other side of empowerment, where Eileen finally ends up with her own sense of who she is?
I think it was hard with the Eileen character, because she does love him. She loves her husband so much. And I think I talk about this with both characters. The imbalance is different in both of their relationships, but that imbalance of love in relationships that can sometimes be the case, and I do think it's true that sometimes one partner loves another partner more, and it can still work. Like, I do think marriages can still work under a multitude of different conditions, and sometimes it doesn't, and in Eileen's case, that I think the struggle, and I think I maybe didn't even know right up into the end what her choice would be. I was like, what is going to happen? What is she going to do? Because you can see with her in that character how making the other choice would maybe still make sense, to her character. But at the end of the day, I was like, hell no,
I was glad, actually.
Yeah.
I was happy for that. I thought I don't know if we have any, I'm going to check to see if we have any questions from our audience. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's time to, I don't see any open questions at the moment. So if anyone's out there and has a question, now would be the time for Rebecca, for our author, to answer those. I'm just going to keep that open and we'll go on a little bit. Also, I like to ask, what are you reading right now? Because you put this book out during a pandemic, really,
Yes.
or it came to your audience,
Yeah.
and it's probably going to be widely read because it appeals to, you know, mothers and sisters in marriage. I mean, I think it should be perfect choice for a book club too. Also. There's so much in there for that. But what are you reading now? I mean, have you put this to rest and said, okay, I'm going to do your virtual events as much as you can, and then do you have another reading life, or are you working on a project that precludes you from writing? Reading?
No, I tend to be a little, like, when it comes to my reading, my writing, I do tend to be a little scattered, and this, kind of trying to promote a book and social media and pandemic, is kind of added to that sort of scatter shot that's happening in my head at this point. So I wake up every day. Yeah, I wake up every day with very firm, like, okay, Becky, you're gonna pull it together and you're gonna be very focused, and here's your list of things that you're gonna get through today. And I think, like most people, I take care of the priority stuff. And right now the priority has been, trying to promote, this book since it just came out June 1st and things like that. And the kind of second priority has been continuing to work on the next book, because that's due to my publisher very soon. And so that's been coming along. It's, I'm not, again, I think the focus, and I've heard a lot of other people say too, it is sort of a struggle right now. To focus, and a lot of other writers have said, I can't do it right now. And I have been doing it. It's just it seems at a much more kind of hodgepodge, slower pace kind of thing, but it's getting there. With regards to reading, I've been buying books like crazy. And so I just finished one. She's also a fellow Colorado author, and she just released her first book. It was a cozy mystery, and her name is Kate Lansing, and the book is Killer Chardonnay. And so I would say that was kind of the perfect,
great title.
Yeah, it's a great title. It's set in Colorado. It's set in Boulder, and it was really just sort of the perfect, light, cozy mystery, this cradle your soul kind of book, right now. And so I really enjoyed that. And then I brought a couple. And so also I have, this is one I bought recently.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Beach read. And then I also have The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. So did you already read this?
Fantastic. You'll love it. Yeah.
So this one's high on my list too. And oh my God. And I have The Last Flight sitting over here by Julie.
Oh, yeah.
So Julie Clark and I have the same publisher, actually. And so I haven't read that yet. It's way over there, so I won't get up and get it. Also All Adults Here by Emma Straub, and Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. And then I have another book that this one is actually a advanced reading copy for a woman who's in. So I belong to Women's Fiction Writers Association. I'm actually on the board. I'm the secretary of the board there. And one of our authors, she's also in my 2020 debut group. She has a book coming out called Exit Strategy. And that's by Lainey. And that's going to be coming out in July. And so I'm going to read that one probably next, because I said I would read it before it came out. So that's next on my list. So yes, I'm all booked up with the books. So yeah.
Well, that's a nice thing to have. I have a lot of books also. We do have a question from Angelina, and I will read it to you. Can you please talk a little bit about how you knew that you were a writer, and how that has an influence on your life? And also, how have your past books helped to inspire her perfect life?
Okay. So how did I know I was a writer? So this is it's an interesting question to me because, a lot of writers, I love watching writer interviews, and I love, like, same thing. Like, I'm a fan way before I consider myself a writer. Like, I'm fascinated by other authors. And so many of them will say, oh, I always wrote, or I started when I was 8, or I always knew I wanted to be a writer. And I will tell you, honestly, that was not the case with me. Although, like characters in my book, when I think back on my childhood and I think about the amount of reading that I did, and I think about, like, writing assignments that I would do for a class. And so I have a really, very sort of vivid memory of, I think it was 6th grade, and we had to write, like, a short story. And I remember my teacher, like, reading it, and then he came to me, and he's talking to me about it, and he has this just sort of kind of, like, look on his face, and I was kind of like, at first I was like, did I do something wrong, whatever. And that he was really very praising of it. And I, had never in my life been praised for, writing, or I don't think I'd ever really written anything, that was like that. And I just remember when my mother came to teacher conferences that year, he, like, pulled her aside and was, like, talking about this piece that I had written. I wish I still had it. I wonder if my mother has it, like, in a box somewhere, kind of thing.
Probably.
So I think about that now, but at the time it wasn't like I was like, I should be a writer. It was just kind of like, hey, my teacher liked my story. That's amazing. And I will say, I wrote journals, like, through all of my high school years, but I actually never allowed them to exist. And here's the thing: I would write something in a journal, and I would go back and read it later, and I would be like, this sucks. And I would rip it out and I would tear it up. And the reason why I think I would do that is because I knew what good writing was. I had spent an entire lifetime reading good writing. And so now I would write something in, like, a journal or whatever, a story. And it was not as good as what I had read from writers who had been practicing and revising and been edited and all that stuff. And so I just never gave it any space to ever become anything else. And it really wasn't until I was pregnant. I was 27. I was pregnant with my daughter. I started writing a book. I don't know why or what was the kind of, I'd always read. I just started writing a book, and I happened to be pregnant. That's another thing I hear a lot too, that people start writing when they're conceiving books or conceiving babies. I don't know, sort of all this stuff. And so that's when I first started writing a book. And that book, I think, took me like 5 years, to write. And then was kind of the boom of, like, YA. And I was just enthralled with the pacing, the dialogue, they just kind of swept you up. And I really enjoyed those. And I was like, oh, I want to write, some YA. And I was into this kind of metaphysical thinking, which is, I have my whole Ascendant series, which is definitely like a metaphysical kind of quest, sort of series. And so I think for me, and it's funny because I just wrote an interview for Kristen Nelson. She's not my agent, but I used to work for her. And she did an interview with me on her blog, Pub Rants, recently. And one of the questions in there was the transition from YA to women's fiction, and why. And the reason is I kind of stopped reading as much YA as I used to. And I really do think the reason is because my kids were transitioning into their teenage years. And I couldn't, like, as a mother, like, who is, setting boundaries, expectations, saying, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Absolutely no way. Like, all of a sudden I'm the antagonist, you know what I mean, to that whole, time of life. And I couldn't get in the headspace of the teen. And all of a sudden, if I did, I'd probably sound very preachy, and nobody wants to read a preachy YA book kind of thing. So I really kind of thought about, I read so many different kinds of books. I really was kind of thoughtful about, would I want to write a thriller? Would I want to write horror? Would I write, what? And I really kind of came back to this idea with, well, what's the type of book I read the most? And it really is like the book club fiction. Like I read a lot of the kind of book club fiction, and that's what I wanted to write. I wanted to write women's fiction with some mystery or suspense. And I would like to have the ability to kind of play with the idea of the suspense, like maybe some books have more and some have a little less. I wouldn't call them thrillers because I think I missed the mark with regards to that straight up thrill ride, you know, that happens with some of those thrillers that you love so much. But I do like the mystery, and I think I like the suspense, and I do think that's what turns pages.
Yes.
Is the questions, unanswered questions, and then, you know, and getting to them. But definitely much more of the kind of psychological, you know, for the characters, their psychological arc, and how is this going to change them? You know, how does their past inform who they become? How do their current circumstances, you know, how is that impacting who they will be by the end of this book? So yeah. So no, I didn't always know I wanted to be a writer.
I think we answered that. I don't see any other questions at the moment. So let's see, I think we're gonna wrap up here pretty soon. Is there anything you'd like to add about your next project, or you know,
I mean, that one's kind of getting close. It's funny, you know, the kind of like, you know, describe it. I think it's definitely women's fiction. It kind of takes place in a neighborhood in Colorado, and these kind of dynamics of the different people in the neighborhood, and you know, a death happens, you know, kind of thing. And it's kind of like, how does this impact this kind of insular community kind of thing going forward? And so we'll see. Hopefully it'll all come together. Sometimes I don't know until I read through it a second time, you know, what exactly are we going for here? But right now it's just trying to get that first draft, you know, out, and then, you know, going back and going, okay, what do we have, and what can we shift around or move or tighten up or get rid of altogether, to make it, you know, flow through, I guess.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you have great success with this book, and we'll do our best to promote it. We're going to have a link on our website, of course, for that, and we'll be looking for your next project. But great success! Thank you so much for joining us, and I really learned a lot. Your book changed the way I think about some of these issues, and because I have a sister, and it's interesting, and it's a great book club book, as I mentioned. So.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you, Lisa, and Bookworm, for having me. I think that this is just it's a great opportunity for me, and to talk about my writing and the book. And so I'm very appreciative of you guys. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and good luck on your virtual book tour.
Thanks.
Okay.